Have you ever watched your child scream in terror at something as simple as bathwater? Not the usual toddler fussiness, but genuine primal fear? The kind that makes you wonder if they're seeing something you can't. Before we begin, I want you to think about this. What if the fears we can't explain aren't fears at all, but memories? What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a case documented by researchers, witnessed by museum archivists, and confirmed by descendants who had no idea their family's story would resurface. In the nightmares of a 4-year-old boy from Ohio. This is the story of Ethan Carter, a boy who had never seen the ocean, never learned about ships, never heard the word Titanic spoken in his home. And yet, he knew exactly how it felt to drown in the freezing Atlantic, from the inside of a sinking ship. If you're watching from the United States, from Ireland, from anywhere in the world, this story will stay with you, because some memories don't die with the body. They wait, and sometimes they find their way back. The first sign came on an ordinary Tuesday evening in Columbus, Ohio. Sarah Carter was running a bath for her 4-year-old son, testing the water temperature with her elbow, the way her mother had taught her. The bathroom was warm, steam rising gently from the tub, rubber ducks lined up along the edge like little yellow soldiers. "Ethan, sweetie, bath time," she called. What happened next would mark the beginning of something she couldn't explain. Ethan appeared in the doorway, took one look at the filled bathtub, and let out a scream that didn't sound human. His small body went rigid, eyes wide, with a terror that seemed far too ancient for his 4 years of life. "No, the water's coming in! It's cold! It's so cold!" He collapsed onto the bathroom tiles, curling into a fetal position, his small hands covering his ears as if trying to block out sounds only he could hear. "The lights went out! I can't see! I can't!" Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling her son into her arms. His skin was ice cold despite the warm steam filling the bathroom. His heart was racing so fast she could feel it through his pajamas. Ethan, look at me. You're safe. You're home." It took 20 minutes for the screaming to stop. 20 minutes of holding her trembling son while he muttered words that made no sense. "The boilers, the steam. Tommy couldn't get out. Tommy couldn't..." When Ethan finally fell silent, exhausted from the episode, Sarah sat on the cold bathroom floor with her son in her arms and felt something she had never experienced before. The absolute certainty that her child had just remembered something impossible. Michael Carter had always been a practical man. As a marine engineer specializing in ship restoration, he dealt with facts, blueprints, and structural integrity, not supernatural phenomena. When Sarah told him about the bathroom incident, he listened carefully, then offered a rational explanation. "Kids have vivid imaginations, Sarah. Maybe he saw something on TV. Maybe one of the kids at preschool told him a scary story." "He's never watched anything about ships, Michael. We've been careful about what he sees. And he said a name. Tommy. He kept saying Tommy couldn't get out." Michael frowned but said nothing. That night, he checked Ethan's viewing history, his books, his toys. Nothing related to ships, nothing about water disasters, nothing that could explain what had happened. But over the following weeks, the incidents multiplied. Ethan began drawing pictures that made no sense for a 4-year-old. Not stick figures or houses or suns with smiley faces. He drew complex mechanical structures, pipes, gauges, large cylindrical shapes that Michael recognized immediately. Boilers. His son was drawing industrial boilers. "What's this, buddy?" Michael asked one afternoon, holding up one of Ethan's drawings. That's where I worked," Ethan said matter-of-factly, not looking up from his crayons. "Down in the belly of the lady. It was hot, so hot you could barely breathe. But I didn't mind. I was saving money to bring Maggie to America." Sarah, standing in the kitchen doorway, felt her coffee cup slip from her fingers. "Who's Maggie, sweetheart?" "My sister. She was sick. The doctor in Belfast said she needed medicine we couldn't afford. That's why I took the job on the big ship. 1 voyage, they said. 1 voyage to America and back, and I'd have enough money to make her well." Ethan looked up, and in his eyes was a sorrow that no 4-year-old should carry. "But I never went back. The water came too fast, and now Maggie thinks I forgot about her." That night, after Ethan was asleep, Michael sat in his home office until 3 a.m., searching through historical records with trembling hands. What he found made him forget how to breathe. The RMS Titanic had employed approximately 176 men in its engine and boiler rooms. They were called stokers, firemen, trimmers, the invisible army that kept the massive ship moving. They worked in temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit, shoveling coal into furnaces that powered the greatest ocean liner ever built. When the iceberg struck, these men were the first to face the flooding. Most of them never made it above deck. The survival rate for engine room workers was almost 0. Michael began searching through crew manifests, his engineer's mind cataloging names, ages, hometowns. And then, on a crew list from Southampton, he found it. Thomas Tommy Brennan, age 22. Occupation? Stoker. Hometown? Belfast, Ireland. Survived by 1 sister, Margaret Maggie Brennan. Michael stared at the screen until the words blurred. His son had named a real person, a real victim, someone who had died in the bowels of the Titanic 112 years ago, a person whose existence Ethan could not possibly know about. 3 weeks later, the Carter family boarded a flight from Columbus to Belfast. Michael had told his employer it was a research trip related to his marine engineering work, which wasn't entirely a lie. The Titanic had been built in Belfast's Harland and Wolff shipyard. There was a world-class museum there dedicated to the ship's construction and tragic fate. But the real reason for the trip sat in seat 14C, clutching a worn, stuffed elephant and staring out the window at the clouds below. Ethan had been unusually quiet since they'd told him about the trip. When Sarah mentioned they were going to Belfast, his reaction had been immediate and visceral. "That's where I was born," he'd said. "That's where Maggie is." "Sweetheart, Maggie would be very, very old now. She might not be." "She's there. I can feel her waiting." Now, 7 hours into the flight, Sarah watched her son's reflection in the airplane window. He hadn't slept, hadn't asked for snacks or complained about being bored. He simply sat, watching, as if he knew exactly where they were going and what they would find. "You okay, buddy?" Michael asked, reaching across to squeeze his son's small hand. Ethan turned from the window. "Daddy, when we get there, can we go see the big cranes? The yellow ones? That's where they built her. I remember watching them lift the pieces into place. It took so long, years and years. And everyone said she was unsinkable." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. There was no way Ethan could know about the Harland and Wolff cranes, the famous yellow gantry cranes named Samson and Goliath that had become symbols of Belfast. They hadn't shown him pictures. They hadn't discussed the shipyard. And yet, as the plane began its descent over the Irish coastline, Ethan pressed his face to the window and whispered, "I'm coming home." The Titanic Belfast Museum rises from the city's docklands like a frozen shard of ice, or perhaps like the bow of a ship emerging from the water. Its angular architecture is designed to evoke the vessel it commemorates, and inside its walls lie the most comprehensive archives of Titanic history anywhere in the world. The Carter family arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of soft Irish drizzle hanging in the air that locals barely notice but Americans find romantic. Michael had arranged a private tour through his professional contacts. As a marine engineer, he had legitimate reasons to examine the ship's technical specifications. What he hadn't told anyone was that he was hoping to verify, or disprove, the impossible things his son had been saying. Their guide was a woman named Dr. Claire Donovan, the museum's chief historian. She had silver-streaked hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of academic intensity that came from dedicating one's life to a single subject. "Welcome to Belfast," she said, shaking Michael's hand. "I understand you're particularly interested in our engine room archives?" "That's right. Specifically, the crew members who worked in the boiler rooms." Dr. Donovan raised an eyebrow. "That's a very specific interest. Most visitors want to hear about the first-class passengers, the Astors, the Guggenheims. Not many people remember the men who actually kept the ship moving." "We remember," Sarah said quietly, holding Ethan's hand. Dr. Donovan looked down at the small boy, and something in her expression shifted. "Well then, let me show you something most tourists never see." She led them through the public exhibits, the recreation of the first-class staircase, the artifacts recovered from the ocean floor, the wall of names listing every soul who had been aboard. Ethan walked through it all with an unsettling familiarity, occasionally stopping to look at specific photographs or objects. At one point, he paused before a glass case containing a pair of worn leather work gloves. "Those are the wrong gloves," he said. Dr. Donovan stopped. "I'm sorry? Those aren't stoker gloves. Stokers didn't wear leather. Too hot." We wrapped our hands in wet rags, changed them every hour when the boilers were going full. He looked up at the historian. "Whose gloves are those, really?" Dr. Donovan stared at the 4-year-old boy, as if he had just spoken in a foreign language she couldn't identify. "He's very observant," she managed. "You're right, actually. Those gloves were misattributed in the 1990s. They belonged to a deck worker, not an engine room worker. We've been meaning to update the display." Michael felt his stomach drop. His son had just corrected a museum historian on a detail that experts had gotten wrong for decades. Dr. Donovan led them down a corridor marked "Staff Only" and unlocked a door leading to the archive room. The space was climate-controlled, filled with rows of filing cabinets and document boxes, the accumulated research of 100 years of Titanic scholarship. "What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Carter?" Michael took a breath. He had practiced this moment in his head a dozen times, trying to find words that wouldn't make him sound insane. "Thomas Brennan, a stoker from Belfast, died in the sinking." Dr. Donovan nodded slowly. "Tommy Brennan? Yes, I know that name. Give me a moment." She disappeared between the filing cabinets while Sarah knelt beside Ethan. "How are you doing, sweetheart? This must be a lot to take in." Ethan shook his head. "It's okay, Mommy. I've been waiting a long time for this." Dr. Donovan returned carrying a worn manila folder. Her face had lost some of its professional composure. "I have to ask," she said, her voice careful. "Why are you interested in Thomas Brennan specifically? He wasn't famous, he wasn't notable. He was just one of the 176 men who died below decks. Michael looked at his son, then back at the historian. Because my son has been talking about him for months, describing his life, his work, his sister, details he couldn't possibly know. Dr. Donovan was silent for a long moment. Then she opened the folder. Then perhaps you should see this. Inside the folder was a photograph, black and white, edges yellowed with age. It showed a group of young men standing in front of the Harland and Wolff shipyard, the skeletal frame of an enormous ship rising behind them. And in the center of the group, grinning broadly, stood a young man with dark hair and familiar eyes. Eyes that Michael saw every day in his son's face. "That's Thomas Brennan," Dr. Donovan said quietly. "Taken in 1911 during the Titanic's construction. He was 21 years old." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth because the resemblance wasn't subtle. It wasn't a matter of interpretation or wishful thinking. The young man in the photograph and the 4-year-old boy standing in the archive room shared the same face, the same eyes, the same jawline, the same slight upturn at the corner of the mouth, as if a soul had found its way back into a body that matched its memory of itself. Ethan reached out and touched the photograph with one small finger. "That's me," he said simply, "before the water came." Dr. Donovan sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "I've worked in this museum for 23 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've heard every conspiracy theory, every ghost story, every claim of paranormal connection to this ship. I've dismissed them all." She looked at Ethan with an expression that mixed fear with wonder. "But I've never seen anything like this." The archive room fell silent. Sarah held Ethan close, feeling his small heart beating steadily against her chest. So calm, so certain, while her own pulse raced with a fear she couldn't name. Dr. Donovan spread the contents of Thomas Brennan's file across the table. There wasn't much. A few documents, a crew manifest entry, a single photograph, and a letter. "Thomas Brennan was born in Belfast in 1890, she began, her historian's voice steadier now, falling back on facts as a refuge from the impossible. His father died in a factory accident when Thomas was 12. He became the sole provider for his mother and younger sister, Margaret." "Maggie," Ethan whispered. Dr. Donovan paused, then continued. "He worked at the shipyard from age 14. When the Titanic was commissioned, he was offered a position as a stoker for the maiden voyage. The pay was exceptional, £6 a month, plus the promise of a bonus upon arrival in New York." She slid a document across the table. It was a crew contract. The signature at the bottom neat but simple. The handwriting of a man who had learned to write, but rarely had occasion to practice. "According to family records we've collected over the years, Thomas planned to work the Atlantic crossing route for 1 year. He was saving money for his sister's medical treatment. She had tuberculosis." Sarah felt tears forming. "Did she survive?" "She did, actually. After Thomas's death, the White Star Line paid a small compensation to the families of crew members. It wasn't much, but combined with community donations, it was enough to send Margaret to a sanatorium in Switzerland. She recovered fully and lived until 1987. "Maggie got better," Ethan said, and for the first time since they'd arrived in Belfast, he smiled. "She got better." Michael leaned forward. "You said family records. Does that mean there are living descendants?" Dr. Donovan hesitated. "There are. Margaret married in 1923 and had 3 children. Her granddaughter Ellen still lives here in Belfast. She's visited the museum several times. In fact," she paused, as if weighing whether to continue. Ellen donated some of Thomas's personal effects to our archive, items that Margaret had kept her entire life. "Can we meet her?" Sarah asked immediately. "I can make a call, but I should warn you, Ellen is protective of her family's history. She's dealt with Titanic enthusiasts who treat her great-uncle's death as entertainment. She may not respond well to—" Dr. Donovan glanced at Ethan. "To this kind of claim." "It's not a claim," Ethan said quietly. "It's the truth. And Maggie would want her to know I came back." Dr. Donovan stared at the boy for a long moment. Then she reached for her phone. The call lasted only 3 minutes, but those minutes stretched like hours. Sarah watched Dr. Donovan's face shift through expressions: professional calm, surprise, something that might have been disbelief, and finally, a kind of wonder. When she hung up, her voice was strange. "Ellen wants to meet you," she said. Dr. Donovan shook her head slowly. "She said she's been dreaming about her Uncle Thomas for the past month. Every night. She thought she was losing her mind. And now you show up, asking about him specifically." She looked at the Carter family with eyes that had abandoned skepticism entirely. "I don't know what's happening here, but it seems like something wants you to find each other." Ellen Brennan McCarthy lived in a small brick row house in East Belfast, the kind of home that had housed working-class families for generations. The street was quiet, lined with identical houses that spoke of community, of roots, of people who stayed where their families had always been. She opened the door before they could knock. A woman in her 70s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that immediately fixed on Ethan. "Mother of God," she whispered. For a moment, nobody moved. Ellen gripped the door frame as if she might fall. Her gaze locked on the 4-year-old boy standing between his parents. "You have his face," she said. "The photographs don't do it justice, but I can see it. You have Tommy's face." Ethan stepped forward, and Sarah had to resist the urge to pull him back. "Are you Maggie's daughter?" he asked. "Her granddaughter. Maggie was my grandmother. Did she keep singing? She always sang when she was working. Old Irish songs. She had the prettiest voice in all of Belfast." Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. "She sang every day until she died," Ellen whispered. "She said the songs kept Tommy close. She said he could hear her, wherever he was." She stepped back from the doorway, gesturing them inside. "Come in, please. I think my grandmother has been waiting 90 years for this moment." The inside of Ellen's home was a shrine to memory. Photographs covered every wall. Generations of the Brennan family, from stern Victorian portraits to modern digital prints. But in the center of the mantelpiece, in a place of obvious honor, sat a framed photograph of a young man in work clothes. Thomas Brennan. The same image from the museum archive. Ellen guided them to a worn sofa and disappeared into a back room. She returned carrying a wooden box, its surface dark with age and handling. "Grandmother kept this her entire life," Ellen said, setting the box on the coffee table. "She called it Tommy's box, wouldn't let anyone touch it. When she died, she made my mother promise to keep it safe. Said someday someone would come who needed to see what was inside." She opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been white but had yellowed to cream, were a handful of objects. A pocket watch with a cracked face, a small Bible with a pressed shamrock inside, a folded letter, and a photograph of 2 children, a boy and a girl, perhaps 10 and 7 years old, standing in front of a brick building. "That's Tommy and Maggie," Ellen said. taken about 1900, outside their church. Ethan reached into the box without hesitation and picked up the pocket watch. "This stopped when the water came in," he said. "I felt it go cold against my chest. I thought," his voice faltered, "I thought about Maggie. That was my last thought, that I'd never see her again, that she'd think I abandoned her." Ellen was weeping openly now. "She never thought that, not for one day. She talked about you constantly," she caught herself. "About Tommy. She talked about Tommy constantly. How brave he was, how he worked so hard to take care of her. How his last letter promised he'd be home soon, with enough money to make her well." "The letter," Ethan said. "Can I see it?" Ellen unfolded the aged paper with trembling hands. The handwriting matched the signature from the crew contract, simple, careful, full of effort. "Dear Maggie," Ethan recited without looking at the paper. "The ship is grand, bigger than anything you could imagine. The work is hard, but the lads are good. I think of you every night before I sleep. Don't worry about me. I'll be home before you know it. Your loving brother, Tommy." Ellen dropped the letter. "How?" she breathed. "That letter has never been published, never been shown to anyone outside our family. How could you possibly—" "Because I wrote it," Ethan said simply. "I wrote it the night before we hit the ice. I was going to post it from New York, but I never got there." The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. Then Ellen did something unexpected. She knelt down in front of Ethan, taking his small hands in her weathered ones, and looked into his eyes with an intensity that seemed to pierce through time itself. "Tommy," she said, "if you're really in there, Maggie forgave you. She lived a good life. She got married, had children, saw her grandchildren grow. She died peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by people who loved her." She paused, her voice breaking. "And her last words were about you. She said, 'Tell Tommy I'm coming. Tell him he doesn't have to wait alone anymore.'" Ethan's eyes filled with tears, the first real tears his parents had seen since this whole journey began. "She came?" he asked. "She found me?" "She found you, love. She found you." Something shifted in the room. Sarah couldn't explain it, but the air itself seemed lighter, as if a pressure she hadn't known existed had suddenly released. And Ethan, her son, her impossible, miraculous son, smiled with a peace that seemed far older than his 4 years. "Then I can let go now," he said. "I can finally let go." The next morning, the Carter family stood on the deck of a small charter boat, cutting through the gray waters of the North Atlantic. Ellen had insisted on coming, bringing with her the wooden box and a small bouquet of white roses, Maggie's favorite flower. Dr. Donovan had provided them with the exact coordinates of the Titanic's final resting place. The ship lay more than 2 miles below the surface, in water so deep and cold that it would preserve its secrets for centuries more. They couldn't dive to the wreck. They couldn't see the place where Thomas Brennan had spent his final moments. But they could be there, on the surface, in the waters that had claimed him. The boat's captain, an old Irishman named Seamus, who had stopped asking questions after seeing the look on Ellen's face, cut the engine when they reached the coordinates. "This is it," he said quietly. "We're directly above her." The silence was absolute. No wind, no waves. Even the seabirds seemed to have disappeared, leaving them alone in a circle of gray water and gray sky. Ethan walked to the railing, his small hands gripping the metal. he stared down at the water. The same water that had terrified him for months, that had triggered screaming nightmares and panic attacks. But there was no fear in his eyes now, only recognition. "It's not scary anymore," he said. "It's just sad. All those people, all those dreams that sank with them." Ellen stepped forward and handed him a single white rose. "For Tommy," she said, "and for everyone who never came home." Ethan took the flower and held it over the railing. For a long moment, he simply looked at it, as if seeing something beyond the petals and stems. Then he spoke, not in the voice of a 4-year-old, but in the voice of someone saying goodbye after a very long journey. "I'm sorry I couldn't come back, Maggie. I'm sorry I made you wait so long. But I watched you, you know. I watched you get better. I watched you fall in love. I watched you hold your babies and sing them the old songs." Tears streamed down his face, but his voice remained steady. "I was always there. And now I know you're okay. So I can stop holding on. I can stop being afraid of the water. I can just be Ethan now, a little boy with a whole life ahead of him." He released the rose. It fell slowly, landing softly on the surface of the Atlantic, a spot of white against the endless gray. "Goodbye, Tommy," Ethan whispered. "Thank you for everything you taught me. Thank you for loving Maggie so much that it crossed 100 years to find me." He turned to his parents, and Sarah saw something extraordinary. The ancient sadness that had haunted her son's eyes for months, the weight that no 4-year-old should carry, was gone. In its place was nothing but her little boy, curious, innocent, free. "Can we go home now?" he asked. "I'm hungry, and I want to take a bath when we get back to the hotel." Sarah laughed through her tears. Michael wrapped his arms around both of them, and Ellen Brennan McCarthy stood at the railing, watching the white rose drift away, and smiled. "Rest now, Uncle Tommy," she whispered. "You've finally made it home." 3 months later, in their house in Columbus, Ohio, life had returned to something resembling normal, though the Carter family would never use that word again. Ethan had changed. The nightmares had stopped completely. The fear of water had vanished as if it had never existed. He splashed happily in his baths, begged to go to the community pool, and talked about wanting to learn to swim. But some things remained. He still had an unusual fascination with ships, though now it was the healthy interest of a child rather than the obsessive knowledge of a dead man. He still sometimes said things that surprised his parents, observations about engineering or mechanics that seemed beyond his years. And occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, he would hum old Irish songs he had never been taught. Sarah had framed one photograph from their trip and placed it on the mantelpiece. It showed Ethan and Ellen standing together in front of the Titanic Museum, both of them smiling, connected across generations by something that defied explanation. Ellen wrote to them monthly. She had become a grandmother figure to Ethan, sending him books about Irish history, small gifts on holidays, and always, a pressed shamrock in every envelope. "Some connections transcend time," she wrote in her last letter. "I don't pretend to understand what happened or why, but I know this. My grandmother spent her whole life believing Tommy was still out there somewhere, waiting to come home. And in the end, she was right." Michael had changed too. The skeptical engineer who dealt only in facts and blueprints had started reading books about consciousness, about memory, about the mysteries science couldn't yet explain. "I used to think the universe was mechanical," he told Sarah one night, watching Ethan sleep peacefully in his bed. "That everything could be measured and understood. But now, I don't know. Maybe there's more. Maybe the things that matter most, love, connection, the bonds between people, maybe those don't follow the rules we think we understand." Sarah leaned against her husband, watching their son's chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath. "He's just a little boy now," she said. "Our little boy. Whatever he was before, whoever he was, I think he's finally free to just be Ethan." "And maybe that's enough," Michael agreed. "Maybe that's everything." In the morning, Ethan would wake up excited about preschool, about his friends, about the small adventures that fill a 4-year-old's life. He would eat his breakfast, brush his teeth, and run to the bus stop with all the energy and joy of childhood. But sometimes, when the light hit his eyes just right, his parents would catch a glimpse of something deeper, a wisdom, a peace, a soul that had traveled far and finally found its rest. And in Belfast, on the mantelpiece of a small brick row house, 2 photographs sat side by side. Thomas Brennan, forever young, frozen in 1911, and Ethan Carter, smiling in 2024. 2 faces, 1 soul, and a love that crossed oceans and centuries to find its way home. Some stories don't end with death. Some promises don't break with time. And some souls, the brave ones, the stubborn ones, the ones who loved too much to let go, find their way back. Not to repeat the past, but to heal it. If this story moved you, if you felt something stir in your own heart, perhaps it's because we all carry pieces of lives we can't quite remember. Moments of recognition. Places that feel like home, though we've never been there. Faces that seem familiar, though we've never met. Maybe that's coincidence. Maybe it's imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, it's memory. And the soul's way of reminding us that love never truly dies. It just waits, patient, faithful, eternal, until it finds its way back to where it belongs.